Okay, yes. Join me in welcoming Professor Peju Layiwola. Good day, ma'am.
Hello, Zazie. Always a delight to speak with you.
All right, the delight is much on this side, as we know that you have a lot of beautiful tales about textile that you want to share with us. So let's start with how you navigate towards textile as an art form.
Well, I'll start by saying that my mother is the greatest inspiration for my art. And she taught me when I was growing up, but not just at home, but also she was also my teacher in secondary school in the Federal Government Girls College in Benin City. And she was a very creative person. She could turn waste into wealth. She could transform things that you ordinarily throw away into objects of beauty. And she had a plantain plantation, just like my dad had. And so she would take banana fibers and make sculptures out of it, combining it with chicken mesh and binding wire and make this incredible sculptures. So this was the kind of home that I grew up in, with a mother who was so talented, a very strong woman. And so she taught me my first lessons in tie and dye and batik. And these were the days when we used to have Indantrend dyes from Germany, and also Gaskia fabric from Kano, this shot with fabrics that would absorb dye hungrily, And so I would, use bath sometimes, bath or calico. And my mother was also teaching a lot of the time in the marketplace. She was hired by the then Bender state government to teach women in the marketplace. And so I would go with her because I was very interested in learning all that she had to teach. So I would go with her to teach these women in the marketplace. And they were also very amazed that a young girl could do exactly what her mother does. And it was a very fulfilling experience for me. So she had two shops in the market, Agbado Market, along Akpapava Street in Benin City. They were given to her by her father. And she, had something like a bridal shop, and she sold fabrics. She sold fabrics in the shop. I remember that my dad and herself would travel to Lagos to buy fabrics from large, these very well-established merchants in Lagos. And she would cut out patterns from these fabrics and make beautiful things from it. She would design empty bottles and make decorative bottles, and also design bridal wares. So that much I remember growing up. And she called that shop Penelope Enterprises. I don't know how she came by that name, but I suspect my father gave the shop that name. And so we grew up along with my 7 siblings, seeing my mother create art. And I think I learned the names of different kinds of fabric from that shop. She worked with a lot of foreign materials, and that was my first background into textile. So I only woke up this silent part of my growing up much later in life. I knew it had always been there. And this is where we are now.
Okay. All right. Let me quickly make an important announcement. There is a little one in the house. He's attending this conference with us today. So in case you hear the blah, blah, it is him trying to share his own contribution. All right, Prof, moving on to the next question. There's an exhibition you had in 2019 at Unilag and Alara Lagos. You focused on indigenous Yoruba textiles in your solo exhibition. I'm wondering, has this always been the case to explore Yoruba clothing?
Well, I would say that I usually reference my background being partly Yoruba and partly Edo. My father is from Idumagbo in Lagos State, Babatunde Olatokunbo Olu. And my mother is from Benin, Elizabeth Olowuni Akenzwa. And so I, take pride in that in-between position of being Edo and Yoruba. And these are very strong cultures. These two strong cultures are also linked historically. So that's position I occupy, I try to explore in my art. And so when I reference Benin costumes, it's because it comes from a place of knowing and learning from my mother, who was also very passionate about Edo culture. I think I also had an overdose of it growing up. So she would celebrate the culture with dressing us up in Edo costumes, even when we're not going out. And I can't even tell the number of couples that she dressed up in Benin City. And throughout my growing up in the city, I run into people who say, "Oh, are you Mrs. Olo's daughter? She dressed me up for my wedding." So she was so culturally aware. And so I grew up seeing her stitch fabrics. I also saw her beading. Somewhere in the corner of the living room, we always had a tray, an aluminum tray that had beads of different sizes, needles of different sizes. And she did this very beautiful, elaborate ukuku, which is the hairstyle for the Edo people. And she would beat it halfway. Sometime in the night, she would go back to it. So we always saw her working and doing patchwork as well. So that was how I developed interest in the things that she did, the crafts, the art and crafts that she did. And that's my mother wearing the kuku and some of the beads and sitting on her sculpture as well. She did art in the University of Benin, also did a master's in sculpture, and was involved in bronze casting. Actually the very first female to go into bronze casting in Benin City. And yes, her background as a daughter of the King of Benin, His Royal Majesty of Akenzo II, who reigned from 1933 to 1978. So, so most of the things she wore and the things she carried as paraphernalia of office, being a princess, were done by her. And so when her father passed in 1978, she designed the commemorative cloth, which was used for the obsequies of His Royal Majesty. And she did that in two colorways, in yellow and also in a white background. And to tell you that, textile had always played a major role. So seeing her do all of these things inspired me. And these were the registers that I fell back on when I grew up. So I also referenced this in one of my works I did in 2010, the textiles that she made. I also tried to inscribe that textile into one of my installations, which was shown in 2010. So my parents, it's interesting that here they're clad in ashoke during my wedding. And this ashoke was done in Insane. My in-laws come from Insane, which is a very popular, very well-known weaving center. So it wasn't just about Benin clothing all the way, but again, this played a very vital role. I was dressed during my wedding in this costume, and my mother also did all these that were really relevant to some of the projects that we collaborated on in 2014. And so I just keep oscillating between the two cultures in my projects. So some of the performances and some of the engagements that she had while growing up, she was very much younger. And she was also inspired by her mother, Ehioba Edel Akenzo, the wife of Akenzo II. So she bought the title Ehioba, which means the spirit of the king. So she was the embodiment of the Oba of Benin. And so she was very close to him, and she would design his handkerchiefs, do embroidery on his handkerchiefs, and also string beads on his slippers, and do really very ornate costumes for her husband, the king. So that was, how my mother was inspired as a young girl from her mother, and then she passed on the skills to me. So when I carry out my projects, this is it comes from this level of inspiration, being inspired by people around me who were great mentors in the arts while growing up in Benin City. At some point in her career, she was also making paper beads and beads from what you call cascamide glue, and sometimes even recycling paper straws to make this really lovely beads, which I also taught my students. So um, when I refer to the costumes in my projects, like the Who Centenary project, I go back many years to when I learned this skill from my mom, and also passed on the skills to my students who have been taught to make paper beads for their performances, using crepe for making costumes and making things look as real as possible with disused newspapers, old exercise books, and to make amazing jewelry, paper jewelry. And so these are some of the images that have come out of a new project, an interview with my mother. These are the first time I'm sharing these images. And this interview was done within a space, which was also a way of honoring my father who had passed, with an installation at the background. Again, these are all her costumes. And at the background, you can see the fabrics which she designed in 1978. Some of the funds we used for a project, which I'll talk about much later. And the caps you see at the background are caps that my father used during his lifetime. And here we have another female artist, one I have very great respect for, Odori Molade, who interviewed her and also did a performance with her all about clothing as well. And her bronze works to the side of Odun, my mother's works. And this work titled All for Boom was done in 2021. My father had passed. We call him Boom because it's named after the company he set up in Benin City, coined from his initials, Babatunde Olatokunbo Olowu Missions, and the M represents missions. And his hats, the caps that we use for different family events, different family ceremonies. Each of them is a mnemonic of a very important event within the family. So I installed them in memory of my father 1 year after his passing. And so, on the other hand, my father always wanted us to, he always wanted to inscribe his Yoruba identity on us as his children. So he would take us to his tailors to learn to make clothing for us, Yoruba clothing, Buba and Shoro for my brothers, and Iro and Buba for us. But I think Edo culture was overwhelming for him. And he was very happy. And I remember when I was getting married, and these are photographs from my wedding, he actually said that I was going back home. My in-laws had come to overwhelm and inundate us in Benin City with alahari, the traditional, highly prized ashoke. And you can see, my husband to the right, dressed in very well embroidered alahari fabric, and my in-laws were also dressed up, just like my parents as well. So there's something about, referencing both cultures through cloth. And so when I moved to Ibadan, which has now become my new home, I was also inspired by my husband, who's, he doesn't claim that he's a fashionista, but he is. He loves Yoruba clothing, and he does very well to buy choice fabrics from the market. And he acquired a lot from me. The three prized Yoruba fabrics, alahari, sonyo, and etu. And anytime he goes to the market and sees a good one, he acquires it still, as well as, old Adire Eleko patterns. So we dress up, we like to look good. And we dress in all of these beautiful outfits that defines us as a people. He from his saying, now I am from his saying, because sometimes you claim where your husband is from, and we dressed in this beautiful regalia. So these are some of my students who are dressed in the kind of things my mother taught me to make. paper beads, traced the paper beads. All of these are made of paper. And so year in, year out, the students learn things that I've learned over the years, and I'm very happy to pass this on.
So whose centenary was about celebrating Benin arts and culture, and what role did textile play?
Okay, yes, 2014 was the public arts project which I curated and also took part in. It was also an opportunity for me to show with my mother again. We had a joint show together in 2003 in Lagos. And for this public arts event, it was 2014. It was the centennial year of the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorate of Nigeria. And the Nigerian states celebrated this by having huge banquets, and there was so much hue and cry about Nigeria coming together under British rule. But I thought that rather than celebrate that coming together under that kind of structure, that there were a lot of other things to celebrate within the culture of Benin. So we went to Benin City, to Egun Street, the historic seat of the bronze casters. And it was great for us to celebrate a culture that has stood against British imperialism. For me, I was looking to invite other artists to vent the project, and I invited performance artists, photographers, installation artists to go to Egun Street to do these iterations. So this was what we did. And of course, I invited quite a number of artists, the renowned performance artist Jalili Atiku, who was also my student. And he got these beautiful outfits that look like bronze, because we're going to the home of bronze casting. And he took these interesting materials that are used as covering for fabrics that had the color of bronze for his projects. And other artists who did on-site paintings and installations. And we did all the costumes, we designed all the costumes which the women wear. Some of the costumes that I did were later exhibited in Kunsthaus Dresden, in Germany, and also in Spain. And again, costumes and textiles played a vital role, even though the topic that was being discussed was about the Benin bronzes, which has also been a major area of focus for me, the issue of restitution and all of that. In fact, my exhibition of 2019 came out of the place of trying to look for something that was more celebratory rather than this very emotive topic of pillage I went on in Benin in 1897. So I was looking to do a project that would celebrate culture in a way that will not drain you emotionally. And I remember that in 2019, there was very much out about whether the works were going to be returned to Nigeria or not. So I thought that I should take a break and go in the direction of textiles, and that did it for me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I know you are also interested in community engagement, and you spoke about how you accompanied your mother to our own workshops in Benin. Tell us about that.
Yes, my mother conducted many art workshops with women at the town center, known as Uropota Hall at the Ring Road in Benin City. And these were a variety of workshops. They did a lot of things that could earn them money. These were market women. So the art for them was like, wow, how can we translate this into making money? And these were workshops that had to do with recycling, repurposing materials, things that they could easily get from around their homes. And I saw the transformative power of the arts. And so when I got to Ibadan, I moved to Ibadan in 1994 after I got married. I wanted to replicate this idea that I had experienced in Benin City. And remember, I always went with her. So I thought that I could take this to my new environment and my new space And so I founded the Women and Youth Art Foundation to do exactly what was being done in Benin at the time. And so it was a small group of women who were married to lecturers within the University of Ibadan. And we were nursing mothers. We didn't have jobs, as it were. And so I was the most skilled. I was the artist in the midst. So we would share skills amongst ourselves. They would talk about how we can cut down on cost of baby formula, how we can make our own meals for our babies, and pass on skills, lifelong skills that we needed to have to make our lives much easier. So I would teach them, a lot of the skills that I had. And so that was the beginning of the Women and Youth Art Foundation. That was the beginning of, sharing skills. So I'll go to churches. I was not paid for all of the work that I did, but I was happy to do that. But it took so much time. And I would teach in youth groups, and, at the point I was doing that almost like a full-time job, even though I wasn't being paid. So at the point I now decided I could record some of my sessions. I could record demonstrations and pass it on to people when they came to collect me to teach their own group. And that worked. So I now decided to record them into videos, and it became such a wonderful way of disseminating skills. And so the first videos were done in 1998, which was on tie and dye and batik. And then we did one on beadwork one. And much later, we digitized them and put them into VCDs. And within 7 years, we were able to sell over 300,000 copies. I remember this was in 1998, 2002, 2003. It went like wildfire across the continent, not just Nigeria, because it was also filling a gap within the educational system in Nigeria, where there were very few art teachers and a lot of young people who wanted to learn skills. And so it was serving filling a gap. Like, there's a book, very popular book, titled Where There's No Doctor. So in this case, this cities where there's no art teacher, that you can fall back on Peju Layiwola's DVD. So a lot of people learned skills in textile. Of course, we did about 10 of them. Goldsmithing, beadwork, millinery, and all kinds of arts and crafts that women fell back on as great resource for learning different traditional art forms as well as contemporary art forms within Nigeria. So that was the beginning point. And I must say that I believe very much in the impact women have on their children. And if you teach a woman a skill, she's more likely to pass on these skills to her children. And that was the case for me. I learned from my mother, and my mother also learned from her own mother. And so I decided to, register this as a non-profit and a non-governmental organization known as the Women and Youth Art Foundation. And over the years, we have received support for major projects. The first one was in 2011, the Smart Power Hillary Clinton grant, which was a US State Department grant that brought a renowned artist from California, Brett Cook, to do a public art project in Ibadan and Lagos. And then we got the US Consulate grant for the work that we did. We got the US Alumni Association Award for our project. And of course, the British Council Award for our work with artisans communities that do a lot of fabric designing in the Lagos area of Aguda and Ichere, as well as Akele in Surulere. So it's been such a wonderful experience, impacting the lives of people who are less privileged. We work with disadvantaged populations in different parts of Nigeria. We just came back from Ilora near Oyo, where we worked with another NGO teaching young people skills, and they were very excited. So these are some of the VCDs that were produced. The first one on tie and dye, and we also did a lot of community projects with children in Lagos. Within the university, with the silk painting and silk dyeing workshops. Also did a lot of workshops in Agbaruto in Delta State, in a workshop that is run by a renowned artist, a printmaker my father, Bruce Onobrakpaya, who has been such a great mentor in the arts, and we call him our father, where we've taught young girls, a lot of them with teenage pregnancy, who absolutely rely on the workshops that are held in Agbaroto in Delta State. And we also do workshops in outside of Nigeria as well. But for us, when we do these workshops, this is more like hobbies. These are more like hobbies for Europeans who perhaps have a means of livelihood. But in Nigeria, it was a case of art for life's sake. They were doing this art because they relied on the skills that they acquired from what they learned.
Oh, kudos, ma'am. Well, how does this differ from master art classes, which you also founded?
Well, master art classes is much broader and it's a younger initiative, and it came as a post-COVID intervention. And there was huge interest in the kind of work that we're doing. And so I made it more available to a larger public through online courses, which are more attuned to indigenous African knowledge systems and textiles inclusive. So we have an online platform, and sometimes we also have in-person classes, which cover a broad range of arts interests. So we keep adding onto the courses which we have online, and you could actually watch our videos on how to do particular textile processes and other art forms as well. And so these courses can be purchased online from anywhere around the world. So both platforms are based here in Lagos, and they're getting more and more recognition. In fact, the Women and Youth Art Foundation just got listed by a French fashion label, Louis Vuitton, that listed Y Art Foundation as one of the artist-led initiatives or artist-led spaces in the Lagos area. So we are getting more and more recognition for the work that we do.
Okay, ma'am. So there is also your work at Rhodes University in South Africa. I remember you told me about referencing South African history to include their textiles.
Yes, I was invited to take up a residency at Rhodes University in Grahamstown, and a residency for artists and writers. It's called RAW, Arts of Africa and Global South Research Program. And what became the high point of my solo exhibition titled Return. And this visit was particularly instructive because Grahamstown symbolizes the continent's common history of oppression and subjugation. This small town has carefully preserved the relics of that ignoble past. So in Grahamstown, the common African history of oppression, subjugation, and dispossession symbolically returns to haunt both victims and victimizers in significant ways. So I also looked at its contemporary framing and presence as a town of significant cultural diversity, which spoke more to me as a repossessed multicultural space. So I viewed Grahamstown itself as an art, as a fertile space embodying multiple significations for the artist and its various publics. So I was drawn to a major highway and district where I lived for a few weeks in Grahamstown, which was named after Sarah Batman, the Khoisan woman who was dehumanized and put in human zoos. So I dedicated a part of my career to consciousness raising, aimed at urging the return of the looted artifacts, given the similarity of the history of the colonization of Grahamstown and Benin Kingdom, the expropriation of Sarah Batman's body, and the return of her body to Hanki, which is a place that is believed that she came from. So you understand the resonance of this South African history with that of Benin City, and the fact that the return of Sarah Batman's body was facilitated at state level within the South African government, between the South African government and the French states. So this provides a model or a template for the return of the Benin artifacts. So the 4 panels that were created, which I titled Dialoguing Series. It's a 4-piece panel made of metal, and this came out of that residency. What do we do to tell the story of historical and contemporary women who have made an impact on South Africa? So I started to think of a cognate and concrete memorialization of this woman whose sufferings across 2 continents emblematized the experience of Black people, but with emphasis on the return of her body parts for internment in hanky. And so in this work, I put side by side the traumatic story of Sarah Batman and the refreshing story of Professor Tobelo Yonkong. And, when you hear about Tobelo Yonkong, it's more, the story is more mentioned, in scholarly and scientific circles. And this is a woman who's very well known. She was a shepherd's girl from Lesotho, but has become such a highbrow scientist, recognized in Rose University for her research in nanotechnology. So what I did was to raise a commemorative cloth for Tobelo Yonkong, and I looked at the textiles of South Africa. I drew on the imagery of Shweshwe cloth, which has its own history, but the fact that it is used widely in South Africa, I used that to create this commemorative cloth with which surrounds the photograph of Tobelo Yonkong, which is the kind of thing that we do even in Nigeria, where you have the image of the person that's been celebrated. And so that image is surrounded by motifs and iconography, which I drew from South African cloth. So for me, this work carries on in its wings the often neglected but engaging stories of suffering, of triumphs and achievements entailed in the difficult existence of African women in the continent and beyond. So this work is about gender, it's also about textiles, about restitution, and also colonialism.
Interesting. Pretty interesting is are the tales behind the textiles that we see, admire, and even use. This is amazing. I'm sure I'm not the only one feeling this way, listening to these beautiful tales behind the textiles that are being created. Moving on now, Prof. Indigo Reimagined was one great solo exhibition at Unilag and Alara Lagos in 2019. What was the motivation behind this exhibition, and what were the highlights? Please.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, that I was looking to do a project that was very celebratory, and I turned to textile. And Indigo Reimagined did this for me. From the images you can see on the screen, people are very happy, and they came to that exhibition wearing indigo, wearing any form of blue to celebrate textiles. And this was a conceptual exhibition comprising performance and installation art. The exhibition highlighted the rich traditions of indigo dyeing and fabric designing techniques such as Adire Eleko or cassava starch resist methods, and showed the great artistic and scientific skills that Yoruba women displayed. It was also to engage with the cultural, economic, political, pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial history of textiles. And so I also did not want to focus on textiles, but use that as a reference point in my work. And so most of the works that were displayed in that exhibition were not made of cloth. Only one was made entirely of fabric. And the others were made of other media, also to show that in creating fabrics, in designing fabrics, there are other materials that do not come to the fore. For example, the stencils are made of metal. They were taken off tea chest cabinets. They were made of zinc, and were cut, the stencils were cut out from these sheets and used to design fabrics. And so my work was exploring other materials to speak about and to speak to textiles. And these are samples of indigo fabrics. So again, we're celebrating an art that was the science and the ingenuity of these craftsmen and women. And also to say that this art interfaced other forms of indigenous knowledge systems. For example, it was basically the same kind of skills or knowledge that was used for soap making, the black oshedudu, using ashes, using the bark of leaves, everything organic, using raffia rather using nylon threads, using the indigo plants, which was pounded and made into balls, which were used for dyeing. So everything was organic, everything was environmentally friendly and very different from the kind of materials that we use today for the art that we do, working with all kinds of caustic chemicals, strong smelling chemicals that are used for fabric designing. But for us to look back and say that we had a very rich tradition of dyeing fabrics, and not just for the indigo, eleko designs, but also for the yarns that were used for weaving, etu, which is an indigo dyed fabric that was hand woven. And so it was also speaking to us return to that glorious past and trying to bring it back in the present, because that is about our identity, celebrating our identity as a people and celebrating an art that is sustainable. Cassava starch that's used for making the resist is also food. It's eaten as a staple in many parts of southwestern Nigeria. So instead of using the non-biodegradable wax used for batik, we can fall back on most of the materials that we find here that are readily available, that are also inexpensive and environmentally friendly. So these are some of the images from the work, from the exhibition. These are some of the works. This is a work that is titled Orimikbe, and it comprises 98 square metal stencils. And, it was an art that was done predominantly by women, but the men decided to mass produce the wrappers that were being made. It could take about 3 weeks for a woman to paint out the patterns, the beautiful patterns that reference flora and fauna. And so the men felt, if we make stencils, then we can replicate these designs over several yards of fabric. And so in this work, I was bringing back that moment of men introducing the stencils, and I got these young men who are also my students. I giving them the opportunity to share in this project. They were very excited about that, to hold these plates and show them out as if they were displaying and spreading out the wrapper over the balustrade to show the patterns that exist. So for me, this work speaks to the materiality, that cloth is not just about the fabric that is taken to the market, but there are many other things that are used to produce the designs. And so when we look at a work like Stamping History, it's an installation that covers about 30 to 40 years of patterns that are used for batik. And so these are foam stamps that are used for creating patterns on cloth. So my argument here is that the cloth goes to the market, but the stamps and the stencils remain in the atelier of the artist and responding to technology. And so you find some of the very interesting emoticons and emojis that you find on your computer, the smiley face, and other contemporary visual iconography that were not available when this art began. So a work like Soon Baby, which is it's made of aluminum foil, looks beyond cloth, looks beyond textiles. It looks at what is underneath textile. So women wear these beads around their waist. Beads are known as ileke or bebe. These are small beads, one around the waist. And usually it's only the lovers or the husband of the woman that sees the beads. So textile can also conceal and it can also reveal. So in this work, you find the circles, which are the beads, the baby beads. And when it says soon baby, it means you are saying raise up the beads, and that reveals something that should be concealed. And you find this circular form appearing a lot of the time in my work. The other work, Even Mother's Wrapper Couldn't Cover, uses textile as a starting point, looks at the wrapper as a metaphor for protection. So when the baby sleeps, the mother ties the baby to her back, and that wrapper is meant to be a protection for the baby. But in today's society in Nigeria, there's a lot of unrest in several parts of the country where bombs go off. And when the bombs go off, a wrapper that was meant to protect gets torn, and personal effects are dispersed. You can find a comb, prayer beads, baby's toys. And when you see a baby doll to the right of this work, it also shows that anybody can be caught in the crossfire, from the young to the old, and that perhaps there's a young child somewhere lurking in the corner. And it also refers to women's work. Women always did their arts within the homestead because they could keep their eyes on their children, on the family, while they did their work. Another work, Oje Market Day, references the market, which was an international market. The Oje market was an international market in the 1960s. And when I got to Ibadan in 1994, even before that time, I used to go to the market with my husband to pick up choice ashoke and adire leko. You don't find them anymore, but at that time you could buy a lot of this from Oje Market. And so I referenced this because I got a lot of my textiles from there and created this huge patchwork, which was displayed in about 8 pieces. And for me, it was not just about the cloth. This is the only work in the exhibition that was made entirely of fabric. And I was using this as a means of talking about the indigo of various techniques, adire alabere, adire alabella, adire uniko, and adire eleko. But then you look at the brown colors, the brown hues, it situates Oje Market in Ibadan. And this work connects directly to poetry as well, to look at the work of the very interesting poem that was written by J.P. Clark of blessed memory, titled Ibadan, running splash of rust and gold, like the rust in this installation. And the way you look at the variegated patterns, the black and white, it goes to show how Nigeria has become a dumping ground for all kinds of textiles coming from China, from Turkey, from different parts of the world. And at the end of the installation, you have all blues calling for us to return to the indigo tradition. The work was displayed within the university and also in a very popular luxury outfit in Lagos, Victoria Island, Alara, Lagos, where the glitterati of the Lagos public saw this work. The fashion and fashionistas saw this exhibition. It was very well received. And so these are the blues at the end of the installation. Also, the sewing machine was kept there to make the statement that this cotton fabric that came in from Manchester in the late 19th century, in a sense, truncated the weaving tradition that was very well known in southwestern Nigeria. Yes, the artists already knew how to do dyeing, they were dyeing yarns for hand weaving. When they met with the British shirting, which was imported in large numbers to Yoruba land, the artists transferred their creative sensibility from hand weaving onto painting and stenciling starch on the fabric. So a lot of people deserted their cocoa farms and went into tailoring because they were making a huge, huge output of textiles that were designed, and they needed tailors to make them into the usual buba and shoro, or buba and wrapper and all of that. So people deserted the farms and began to sew. And so the sewing machine speaks to that point in history. Again, bringing in people that have mentored me over the years, people that I love so much. The Clark family were also there. This was probably one of the last outings that J.P. Clark attended. He came for the exhibition to hear and see children recite his poem in that space. And the work has moved. It was shown in Cologne at the Rattenstrahl Hughes Museum in Cologne, in the Art of Resistance exhibition for over a year between 2020 and 2022, and has been recently acquired by the Stanley Museum in the University of Iowa.
That was great.
Yeah, so for me, these are statements about textile. This is an exhibition that looks at various materials like ceramic materials, when we reference the pots that hold the elu, the vegetal dyes. I also created my own versions of these pots. Now we use plastic containers, but this earthenware pot will aerate the indigo that requires a lot of oxygen. Plastics do not give that opportunity to aerate the dyes. And I painted these beautiful symbols that appear on cloth and on those pots. It was also a point of talking about my personal history, but also talking about the communal history, because some of my fabrics which I've acquired over the years were kept in this installation. And people came into this hall, into this gallery space, to recognize some of the fabrics that they had as well. So if a particular design comes in, it goes into different homes. So they become registers in their own homes. And so they say, oh, my grandmother had this fabric, my great-grandmother had this fabric. And then you see the agbada, which tells us about the beginning. That's a big gap over there. I acquired it in the market in Ibadan. And I didn't know it was that old. I knew it was about the 1950s or 1960s, but I wasn't sure. But when I looked inside the cloth, I saw that it was lined with the commemorative fabric that was used for to celebrate the independence of Nigeria in 1960. And it just tells you that cotton was grown. It was cotton carding and spinning that was done by hand in southwestern Nigeria. And that agbada talks about that point in history. So we also have a work titled Body Blue and the significance of the hands. The hands cannot deceive you is a very popular Yoruba saying. The women worked in unison. They were always working in groups, and their hands were always dyed along with the cloth. So when you see the hands of a typical Iyalaru, hands are dipped in blue, and this is what I was trying to point out here. So this work is titled Oremeji 2, and is inspired by Oremeji 1, which was in the Indigo Reimagined exhibition. And it talks about the importance of friendship to Yoruba people who are always very concerned about maintaining relationships. So even when they feel very bad about something, they couch it in a very polite way. They don't want to hurt the other person. And so it celebrates friendship. And some of the patterns that appear in indigo designs are a reference to friends. So you find titles like Oremeji, you can also find Oremeri, And so this work talks about two friends that are demarcated and, depicted with two different colors. And this work is presently in the Microsoft office in Lagos. And yeah, here it is.
Very, very interesting tales about textiles indeed. But before we run out of time, I need to also make us see one more thing about you. You are not just the producer of exhibits related to textiles. you are also a researcher.
Yeah, my work leans very heavily on history. All the projects I've done basically are based on a lot of research. I think that it's important the message that comes out of the work. I'm not just doing a work that is beautiful, but also a work that has a strong message through all the projects, starting from my solo exhibition on Benin that looked at the pillage that went on in 1897 and up to on to this present one on textile and perhaps even other projects. So history plays a very vital role. I use that as a backdrop for most of my projects. So I'm thankful to the British Council for the cultural exchange grant, which allowed us to do a lot of work in artist communities, doing research, looking at social change, also looking at the immigrants community, how people from outside of Lagos and outside of Nigeria have come into different designing, to engage in fabric designing, and also to look at the change that are occurring in terms of the processes, in terms of the materials, in terms of also the iconography that is being used today. I also have done quite a bit of work, written and published articles on lace, which is published and talks about how even Yoruba people make jest of themselves. You know, they like fashion and they acquire clothing from all over the world. And when they wear lace and on all the perforations you find on lace fabric, they even humor themselves and say that, yes, it's quite expensive to wear, but you turn out to be a very wealthy man, a rich man that is naked, you know, and things like that. So it's such a beautiful thing to look at the various textiles from within Nigeria and outside of Nigeria and how people respond to these in different ways. So I've also tried to do some research, and recently the University of Bayreuth, and I'm also very grateful to them as well, the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence, where I conducted research in the Iwalewa House, looking at the collection of Ulibaya, who came to Nigeria, the German linguist who was in Nigeria in 1950, and how he acquired a good collection of textiles, which make up the collection in the Walewa house, and not just even the indigo plant. He has fabrics from all over Nigeria. And it's interesting to see that sometimes in this collection you find the name of the weaver attached to the cloth. Because usually when you collect fabrics, you have an association, a relationship with the person who weaves the cloth or who makes the cloth. And all of these are documented in that collection. I also am grateful to the Terra Foundation for American Art for giving me an earlier grant to travel to Washington, D.C. to look at a collection of Jane Kennedy, who had been in Nigeria between 1961 and 1968, and also collected a lot of these amazing textiles, some belonging to Nike Okundai, who is very well known internationally for textiles. And for me, it's like the flip side of the Walewa House collection, because you have the same kind of artists that were collected in those two periods. I'm also grateful to Mimi Woolford, the daughter of Jane Kennedy, who painstakingly went through all of these textiles with me, photographing them and, keeping the legacy of her mother going in through the Mbari Center for Contemporary Arts in Washington, D.C. And so it's been like that. Of course, I'm grateful to everybody, my students who have been such a great resource for me and great support for my work at the University of Lagos. And of course, in other places where I've been at the University of Arkansas and elsewhere. So for me, yes, history has always played a vital role, not just official history, but even the day-to-day interactions with people, which forms the history of the future.
Interesting. So much recorded for a professor. I was not expecting any less. All right. So moving to the last, but not definitely not the least question. It's a very, very important question. What do we look for or look out for in the coming days and weeks or even years?
Well, I take one day at a time. And the end of the year promises to be great with the launch of a new book, which was edited by Patrick Oloko. Patrick Oloko has become my research partner. We were together in Greyhoundstown in South Africa. So he's put together a book of articles with wonderful contributors who have looked at the works that's derived from this exhibition titled Indigo Reimagined. And so we have very distinguished scholars who have contributed from all over, from the UK, from the US, from Nigeria, from France. And, the work is supported by the Institute of African and Diaspora Studies here at the University of Lagos. It's also got a grant and support from the University of Bayreuth for research. And also to look out for is the launch of my fashion label. It's going to happen on the same day. And Ash Luxury, which is a fashion brand that focuses on street fashion, will be anchoring and supporting this event in Lagos. So there's a lot to look out for. Just follow us. And yeah, that is it.
Yes, super interesting. And of course, we are anxious. We're looking forward to this amazing unveiling. In addition to all these interesting things that you have in record already. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for what you do. And of course, thank you very much for all the plans that you have in stock for us. Thank you very much. I wouldn't know if we have more time to entertain questions from the audience, but if not, I think we will just have to get them in the chat section, the comment section, and we'll have Prof. I'll definitely see to that Prof would please respond to those questions in the comment section. Thank you very much once again, Professor Peju Layiwola. It's been a pleasure having this chat with you.
Thank you so much, Zazie.